Good evening again, dear guests and speakers, dear partners and colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of Europe Direct at the University of Luxembourg and its partner, I would like to welcome you warmly from the University of Luxembourg in Benval in a hybrid event entitled Brexit Reality Portraits. I'd like to thank our partners, Luxembourg Centre for Contemporary and Digital History, the Young European Movement UK, the European Movement Luxembourg, the European Parliament, and the EPP group in the European Parliament, which are pleased to invite you to this webinar. I would like to thank our outstanding guests. Madame Martin Reichert, President of the European Movement Luxembourg, Professor Catherine Beglu, Vice Rector at the University of Luxembourg, Professor Thomas Covin, Professor at the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary and Digital History, Christoph Hansen, Member of the European Parliament and EP Rapporteur for the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and our colleague Alexia Mitterrocher-Bargonson from the European Movement UK, who is at the origin of an original oral history portrait of the Brexit. The British referendum on 23 June 2016, the majority of the electorate voted for the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the European Union or Brexit. The UK, which signed the Treaty of Accession to the European Economic Community on 22nd January 1972, under the Luxembourg Presidency of the Council of the EEC, left then the EU at the end of a procedure governed by the Article 50 of the Treaty on the European Union. Initially scheduled for the end of March 2019, the withdrawal was postponed 3 times and only took effect on 31st January 2020, following a transitional period. The Withdrawal Agreement covers various issues, including the protection of the rights of EU citizens in the UK and British citizens living in EU countries, post-Brexit financial commitments, and all the questions on the island of Ireland. An agreement on the future relationship between the EU and the UK was approved on 27 April 2021 by the European Parliament. Brexit not only gave rise to political and institutional upheavals, but another long-term consequence arose, namely a polarisation and division of British society that goes beyond generational divisions, socio-professional context, and political and ideological leanings. Whether for or against, the discussion about this divorce are as heated as ever, and the arguments on both sides are becoming increasingly entrenched. To discuss this international event of Brexit over the long term and construct a new narrative of the event by adopting a bottom-up approach via an original oral history project, our Europe Direct and our partners are pleased to invite you to this debate. I would like to give the floor to Professor Catherine Beglu, Vice Rector for Academic Affairs at the University of Luxembourg, in order to give us some opening comments. But before, let me tell you that Professor Beglu is a specialist in Occitan and French literature. From 2011 to 2019, She was a professor of French and Occidental literature at the University of Reading and in the UK, where she headed the Department of Modern Languages and European Studies. Prior to this, she held the post of Director of Postgraduate Education at the School of Literature and Languages of the University and School Director for Research. In September 2019, Professor Leguy took office as the Vice Rector for Academic Affairs at the University of Luxembourg. Professor Leguy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Eleanor. Thank you. I'm noticing people in the chat are saying the sound is quite poor. I think it's because of the sound actually inside the lecture theatre. Anyway, bonsoir, guten Abend, Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Député, Madame Desrochers-Barbançon, chers étudiants, chers collègues et amis, welcome to this webinar, Brexit Reality Portraits. The University of Luxembourg is very, very proud and pleased to welcome the Young European Movement, as well as the rapporteur for the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. I think both of these elements actually give us a very good idea of what it means to be touched by Brexit at this moment. I would like to warmly thank Elena Danescu, my colleague, for a perfect organisation of this complicated event. Now, obviously, we're going to be seeing a film and we're going to be also participating in a discussion. And the last time I was involved in a film and a discussion, and I can't remember if it was December 2018 or December 2017, it was an event organised at the University of Reading by In Limbo Brexit, a group within the UK of EU nationals who developed a book which was being published at that time, which was testimonies by people who presented themselves as in limbo. In other words, were caught between having their settled status approved, hopefully for some of them, in some cases rejected, and certainly were having to make major decisions about their lives. This seems like a very long time ago. However, the group In Limbo Brexit is still active on Twitter, and I thought I would actually think about what does it mean to be living Brexit today. I will give you an example of what my phone, as well as my calendar, was telling me today. As you can tell from my accent, I'm one of the people who has actually had a bit of a change of direction through the Brexit experience. So what is the reality of Brexit and how does it affect people, young people, but not only young people in particular, day to day? This morning, I was discussing with our international relations officer about the Turing scheme. Is it going to be something that we can negotiate with universities over how to keep the post-Erasmus exchanges with the UK going? We have 60 students a year studying English here at the University of Luxembourg. We are going to be sending them for the moment to Ireland, Canada, Australia, the United States, but it looks increasingly as if we won't be sending them to the UK. So that question is a very important one. It affects our students, and of course it affects many other people, especially students in the UK who would like to travel abroad. There's also an exchange on my phone with a relative about, they sent me a book, have I received it yet? And I've said no, because I suspect it's probably waiting for customs clearance and it may take a long time. I was in a meeting earlier this week with two people who run libraries in Luxembourg, and the question was, how are you finding books being exported to the library from the UK? And my colleague answered, we have weeks of delays. So this means that academics are not receiving hard copy books and electronic books are being prioritised. This is affecting research, and it's affecting also the availability of international loans of books. There's also other questions that can be asked about all sorts of procedures to do with having to change your citizenship, having to change your settled status, having to change your registration from an EU citizen to a non-EU citizen, which is reasonably rare, if not unique. So all of those questions, which can be micro questions, but are actually broad ones, are among the very, very rich number of data that we have to show how much of an impact Brexit is having. The film created by In Limbo Brexit a couple of years ago was mostly about people who were making the decision at that point to leave the UK. and were, for example, being featured on local television, breakfast television on the BBC, and very often asked the question, do you feel guilty? Do you feel guilty taking your children out of the UK, depriving them of the opportunity to live in the UK because of what has happened? And I think this question is actually an interesting one as well, which is the emotional aspect of this, that these are not decisions that people made at the time that were easy, and they are still not easy decisions to make. So therefore, I'm very much looking forward to attending this webinar and also looking critically beyond the social media echo chamber, looking beyond the intensely political rhetoric at the impact it has not only on everyday life, but also on prospects and on ambitions and on hopes. So we can therefore turn to oral history and microhistory and emotional history as well. As this is a broad-ranging, complex change, but also one that has great granularity, I look forward to this event, and I really look forward to the constructive discussions that it will hopefully bring about. Thank you very much indeed. Elena, shall I hand over back to you?
Yes, thank you very much, Catherine, for your inspiring ideas. And now, before inviting our second speaker, I'd like to let you know that this event will be recorded and we will publish the recording on the web page of the Europe Direct, on the main page of the University of Luxembourg. Now I would like to invite to address you his ideas, Professor Thomas, who is in charge of public history as the new citizen science of the past at the Luxembourg Center for Contemporary Digital History. Recipient of the Attract Fellowship funded by the Fonds National de la Recherche, Professor Covin is Associate Professor of Public History at the University of Luxembourg. Thomas Covin has been the President of the International Federation for Public History since 2018, and he is the author of Public History, a textbook of practice. Professor Covin, the floor is yours.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I hope the sound is good. I've seen that in the chat. You said that the sound is not too good. Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. I'm using the mic to also look at the screen. So thank you very much. My job tonight is to talk a little bit about history, a little bit about oral history, and as I've seen in the chat, maybe a little bit about Northern Ireland, where I did some of my studies a long time ago. Thank you. So I want to talk about what's been going on in human science, in humanities, and the large democratization of knowledge production. I'm going to talk about public history, which is basically based on participatory models, right? Participatory models to create knowledge with people. It's not only about history, it's about public humanities, it's about science, and it's been this trend, embodied by citizen science, but also open science, to make knowledge more accessible, but also more democratic. The question is, how do we make history production more democratic? What are the challenges, and what are the values of doing history with people and with different publics? Next slide, please. Thank you. So the project, it's a 5-year project financed by the Fonds National de la Recherche on public history as the new citizen science of the past. And one key question is, how can we apply the different methodology of citizen science to history making? What are the limits of working with people when people disagree or they have different perspectives about the past? My PhD was on Northern Irish history, and you may know that they may have very different interpretation of the past. So working with people is great, but what are the challenges? How do we work with people who have very different interpretation of the First World War, or very different interpretation of the recent past, right? So I think this project, Oral History Project, and the Brexit is bringing a lot of opportunities to make history together. So public history, you may have never heard about public history, and that's perfectly fine. There are two main ideas behind public history. One is to communicate history to a large audience. So not only historians talking to historians. That's what we usually do in conferences. Public history is trying to go beyond the wall of universities. Me working with associations in Esch-sur-Alzette, where we live, is making history more accessible. And my students are trying to make history more accessible by making podcasts, by making films, by making games, by making tours. So making history more accessible, more public. But the main challenge is the other aspect, making the production of history more public. And I think this is where oral history enters the debate, right? How do we work with different groups to make history more inclusive? How do we make history, how do we engage people with history, right? Working together to create a more inclusive history. Is it always possible? Is it always possible for every topic? And what does that tell us about the role of history and historians today in our society, where most of people go online and use Wikipedia or social media to inform their conception of the past, right? If you go online, you have a lot of discourses and narrative about the past, but very little historical production. So how do historians deal with that? The fact that everybody is on social media, they have the feeling that everything is equal. So it raises a lot of questions about how we make knowledge together. So oral history has been very informing public history. And oral history is not new. You had projects of oral history in the 1930s, a lot in the 1960s, when historians started to not only talk about the elites, you know, Napoleon, the great man, but also everybody, I mean, everyday life and different social classes. So you had this move away from only the elites, the great men, and to deal more with common people, ordinary people. And the life of ordinary people can inform about the past a lot, and not only this elitist part of history. And since the 1960s, oral history has been actually affecting the whole process of doing history and doing history with people. Because to do oral history, you need at least two people, right? There's a dialogue. And we tend to forget that in oral history, you have this shared authority. You need the narrator, and you need someone who's going to interpret that. But you need two people. It's a dialogue. Without the narrator, you don't have oral history. So that makes us think about, okay, is history not a dialogue? Is it not always a dialogue with your sources, with people who are not only actually sources, but actors in history making? So you had this beautiful book published in 1990 that said that history actually is based on shared authority. Historians share authority with other producers, right? Working with people, working with narrators, with witnesses, whose people may have different perspective about the past. So historians have been working with experience, so people who have been experiencing the events that we talk about. So witnesses, experts, and they have knowledge, they have an expertise. It is very important to understand that the people we interview as historians have some expertise, right? And this is very important in oral history. It is not only about the product, it's also about the process, working with people. And the more you work with people, the more inclusive and maybe the more nuanced your history is going to be. So how can oral history enrich our understanding of the past? I wanted to give you some concrete example about oral history with my students that you can see on the slides. First, we believe firmly that family history can inform our history and oral history. You have here an example on the left of what we call a history harvest. For a topic, we ask people to come with objects, family objects, and we interview those people about the objects, and those stories tell us actually much more than family history. You can have people who tell you stories, family stories that inform us about World War II, about various national history seen through the eyes of family history, right? And oral history has been very useful to retrieve and enrich those kind of histories. Because, know, sometimes when historians go to the archives, they got a certain kind of history because archives have been selected by archivists, by city council, by powerful people. And sometimes you have silence in the archives. I mean, most of the time you have silence in the archives because archives select. By using oral history, you can retrieve things that you may not have in the archives, right? Underrepresented ethnic groups, people who've been silenced. It's been very important in Canada, in America, to work on native population because those people are not in the archives, right? So working with underrepresented or silenced minorities make history richer and more plural. On the right-hand side, you have a project, a current project that we have in Esch-sur-Alzette. This is where the University of Luxembourg is partly based. And we have the project of designing a fresco, a historical wall in Esch-sur-Alzette, which is about the past. But it has to be also participatory. So what we're going to do is to invite the artist to work with the inhabitants. And we're going to do some oral history that will inform the artist's perception of the past. The idea is to have this school bus going into different neighborhoods of Esch-sur-Alzette to record history of migration, which is a big topic in Esch, but also about mining, industry, sports. And those oral history will, in the end, impact the fresco that you see an example on the top right of a 15-meter old fresco that's going to be participatory, informed by oral history. So you don't see oral history in this fresco, but oral history is part of a bigger project of doing history with people. We're also going to have an interactive map in which we have micro-history. It could be the history of a restaurant. There was a famous Italian restaurant in the 1950s in Esch. And the whole history tells us more than the restaurant. It's not in the archives, but it's still in the memories and the testimonies of people, pictures, objects, recipes from that restaurant. It's a micro-history, but that tells us a lot about Italian communities in Esch and how people have been participating in the history and the histories of the city. So we're going to have short oral histories that's going to inform the whole history of Esch. And we're going to end up in a street sign that you can see on the right. It's called Histoire Esch. It's a play word about Esch and history, where people can listen to different stories about specific sites. The objective is also to have sometimes competing interpretation of similar sites, so that people who can listen to these stories may have and listen to the different interpretation of this very famous football pitch or this very famous mining area in the city of Esch. So we are sharing authority, and historians share authority. It doesn't mean that they give up authority. That's a big thing. We share authority, we have some expertise. Historians can bring things to the table. Historians can be helpful to contextualize personal stories, because when people share their histories, it's also and very often like personal stories. The job of the historian is also to make sense and to help contextualize those stories in a bigger framework. It's also important to make sense, right? When you have different stories, not yet, different stories and different competing stories, like in museums. Yesterday we had a symposium about how do you deal with multiple interpretation in a museum. And there was this fantastic panel about Northern Ireland in Belfast. How do you make an exhibition about the past that is inclusive, but also not repeating this us and they, right? So it is very important to play with different narratives in a shared process. So helping to interpret and contextualize the past and to put those personal stories into a broader context. Basically, the whole history that's going to inform our fresco next year. So you have a multiple narratives that fits the project. Thank you. And to conclude, maybe two examples from students, because I believe that our history and public history should inform our training, university training. Because history students need new skills. If they want to be heard, if they want to share authority, if they want to be part of the public discourses, they need new skills. Not only being a good researcher, they need to be able to do good oral history. So they need to know about interview techniques. What questions do you ask? When do you ask those questions? Who has rights, copyrights? Can the narrator say something about the final project? So we need new skills for ourselves, but also for ourselves. We need to be able to communicate. My students last semester had to design a podcast as a final project, not a paper, a podcast. So what did they have to learn? Not only to write an essay, but to write a script. And a script for a podcast is very different. When you have your oral history, how do you integrate your stories into a script? So oral history, oral skills, production, editing is very important. The final example is a documentary film that was made when I was in Louisiana in the United States. It started as a basic student project about oral history of Creole of colors in Louisiana. It started as a very humble project, but the stories were so moving and were engaging so much with the narrative in Louisiana that last month this video had more than, I think, 250,000 views and 1,000 comments. So pretty good for a student project, but I think his success was to connect the whole history and the personal lives to a bigger subject, which is ethnic minorities and racism in the United States. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I'm sure we'll have a very lively discussion.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Thomas Covin, for your presentation, which give us full of insights for the future of doing bottom-up history. And now I would like to present you our next speaker, who is one of the main hearts of this project, Brexit Reality Portraits. Alexiane Terrocher-Barbanson is the Brexit Reality Portraits project manager. She is 22 years old, and she recently graduated from the London School of Economics and Sciences Po in European Affairs. She has been a pro-EU youth activist since 2019, and she is currently IEM UK's international officer and also Volt France Human Resources lead. She is passionate about the EU youth policies and the EU's cultural and educational diplomacy. Ariane, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everyone. So, as I have already been introduced, thank you. I will go straight to the point. Why and how did we create the Brexit Reality Portraits? So, when coming to the UK to study in autumn 2020, I already studied the basics about Brexit and the EU relations. I knew the dates, I knew some elements about the campaign, and obviously the shocking results. I remember that my phone fell from my hands when I read that the UK was actually leaving the EU. I had, however, not been aware of all of Brexit's true consequences, at least for me. First, I can honestly say that I underestimated completely Brexit consequences on people emotionally, and also on their trust in the government. You know, I'm French, so I got this distorted, biased perspective from another country, and what I knew was that there were leavers and remainers. Basta. I understand better now that whilst the referendum asked a very simple question to certain guests in the portraits, it was not the right question. Some would have preferred to leave the EU, politically speaking, but still wanted to be at least partly or closely associated with the economic union, such as the case of Norway, for instance. And therefore, they voted leave, hoping to maintain economic ties with the EU and not something close to a no deal that the UK has today. All of these conversations shook me to my core to some extent, because I met amazing people and they have such a clear and defined opinion about Brexit. But this was actually one of my personal goals, to learn about different opinions. This project was my way of bringing the antagonism between leavers and remainers down, at least partially. And I know that was ambitious. Secondly, I understand that the UK has isolated itself from the EU, but other Europeans have not forgotten about us. I am extremely grateful for all the partnerships we got from Italy, Germany, Hungary, Denmark, Belgium, France, and last but not least, Luxembourg. I mean, today we have the opportunity to make this project transcend screens and discuss it in person, although due to circumstances, we still have to be Zoomified. That is why I'm also extremely proud to announce that the Brexit Reality Portraits will continue its journey across Europe, this time in Norway. The videos will be part of a living library online and an in-person exhibition as soon as January 2022. And on this note, I'm very happy to announce that season 2 is coming and the preparation will start in February or March 2022. But now the question is, how did we get here? We have to be honest, it started rather small. I discovered in the past years, any good idea that turns into a project comes from a great deal of discussion. I had this first key discussion with Ekaterina during Yem London's board meeting in January 2021. Brexit had just entered into force and she told us about her story to get the British citizenship. Spoiler alert, it was not easy. Given the power, the importance and relevance of her story, it occurred to me that her story should be heard along with others, any volunteers who wanted to share. And our series core question is very, very simple. How are UK and EU citizens affected by Brexit? This is where it all started, but the project really materialized after 2 collective brainstorming sessions held in January and February 2021. We were more than 15 people each time from the UK and from diverse European countries. Then our team, split between coordinators, editors, interviewers, and outreachers, was formed soon after in early March or so. And soon, wow, our team grew to over 20 individuals from both the UK and other European countries. And I am using this phrasing on purpose. If we want perception to change, we need language to change. And so the adventure began in March, and the very first portrait was shot at the end of May, Ekaterina's portrait. What did we hope to achieve by doing a series of 10 portraits, 6 being pro-EU and 4 of them being either EU indifferent or anti-EU? Well, in short, very shortly, my goal was, and still is, to ensure that a diversity of opinions is heard from people of all age groups and viewpoints. Be them Remainer, Leaver, neutral about Brexit, their story matters, and they need to know that. Not only for British citizens, but also for European ones, who are also targets of this project. I will now stop on discussing the why and the how. I think that it is high time for us to see a bonus portrait, which is by far one of my favorites. It is both a thank you gift for the University of Luxembourg and the European Movement Luxembourg, who have supported us from the beginning, but also it is my way of sharing with you something that was missing from the UK and other European public debate sphere, an intergenerational dialogue about the concrete effects of Brexit. In the name of the Brexit Reality Portraits team, thank you for watching and for your support. And dear audience, I am pleased and proud to present tonight for the first time Joe and Leila's bonus portraits.
Yeah, I do not like what has happened to the society that I grew up in, that I believed was tolerant, wise, had an idea of how politics and the world and trade worked. Completely devastated now. that's been thrown out the window.
Good morning, Joe and Leila. Thank you for being our guest today. So let's start with the first question. Joe, please, can you start introducing yourself?
Right, I'm Joe Pye. I'm an Anglo-Italian. My mother was Italian, my father English. I'm married to an Englishman and I'm currently living in London.
Great. And you, Leila?
My name is Leila Hooton. I'm a British citizen and I've lived in the UK my whole life. I've just graduated from the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire, where I have been studying music.
Very interesting. So, Leila, what would you say is your relationship with Brexit?
My relationship with Brexit, I would say, is not a positive one. There are a few reasons for this. I mean, firstly, my generation, I know, are going to suffer the consequences of Brexit, which I think is incredibly unfair because a lot of us weren't old enough to vote when the referendum happened. So I didn't get a chance to speak on the issues that will be affecting me in the future, especially some really important issues such as, you know, visa-free travel or easy travel around Europe as a musician. That I feel annoyed that I wasn't able to have my say on that.
I completely understand your feelings. And what about you, Joe?
I'm sickened by Brexit, by how it came about, and the devastating implications for millions of people in this country, their futures, their children's futures. I share with Leila Hooton that it's not a good move, and also for the degradation in our understanding of what our nation, the United Kingdom, used to be. And it is no longer a united nation, a United Kingdom. So I think that basically says it.
So, Joe, you grew up in a country that wasn't part of the European Union, but then it joined this community. How was your experience? Can you tell?
Well, I spent the first 20 years as an Anglo-Italian. Therefore, I was brought up in England, but with an Italian heritage as well. And the thing was, the first 20 years, I was not completely English, and therefore there was some bullying and the idea that you're not quite right because, you know, you're not English. So there was definitely some of that. And then when we actually joined the what was the EEC then, I actually found a place for myself. I could be the European that I'd always grown up knowing that I was from the very beginning of my life, as I may get to explain to you later on. And I spent 48 years, the next 48 years, being happily European. Yeah, taking the slings and arrows of Europe, but being part of an entity that was much more open and a bigger community than I'd grown up in, and I didn't feel odd in it.
And you, Leila, on the other hand, you've lived almost your whole life within the European Union. How is it? How has it been now, this transition, or how have you felt during your whole life?
Well, what Joe was just describing, you know, finding a place for yourself, being part of Europe, that's something I obviously have taken for granted because that's what, you know, I was born into, and I've lived with that, like he said, all my life. And I personally think it's a wonderful thing. I think we're always stronger together. You know, I have family abroad, so I've been able to visit them. I've been lucky enough to benefit from Erasmus throughout my undergraduate degree. All these things that the European Union provides. And I guess I feel stupid for having taken for granted, because now it's gone, and I think it's awful that, you know, the younger generations don't get these opportunities or anything.
And would you say that there has been any change in British society or in the public opinion during the last years, especially the years closer to the Brexit discussions and referendum?
Yeah, Joe, I can see you nodding, but definitely. I mean, for me, there's a huge divide I've noticed. I mean, being a Remainer, I think I surround myself with quite a few Remainers as well. But I know of families who don't talk anymore. I know of my family's friends who just don't talk about politics or Brexit because it's a no-go area.
Joe, please add something.
Change in our society. Yes, we're isolationist, we're elitist. Well, or should I say the persona that the government wants to try and portray is that we are brilliant in the world, we're world leaders in this, that and the other. We've lost any idea of being part of a bigger community, which is absolutely stupid given what we're facing with climate change and geopolitics. So yeah, I do not like what has happened to the society that I grew up in, that I believed was tolerant, wise, had an idea of how politics and the world and trade worked. Completely devastated now. That's been thrown out of the window.
Moving forward, Joe, has Brexit somehow affected your personal or professional future prospects?
Yes, it's broken my family. It's broken my close friendships of 50 years. It's meant that my husband and I, who have been planning our retirement in Italy, we can't go ahead with that because of the problems of not having health card. We're trying to I can get an Italian passport. I'm very lucky, but through my Italian heritage, but it is impossible to get an appointment at the consulate in London, even when you've got all your translations and everything, and be there. I mean, the whole point was that, you know, I have a house next to my sister who's married to an Italian, and we were going to look after each other in our old age, and the last one was going to turn out the lights. And you know, my husband and I both European in the sense of, you know, we love Europe, we love Italy. Don't like the mosquitoes, but we like Italy. And you know, it's shattered our dream. Financially, it's a complete, you know, it's devastating.
It's heartbreaking. And what about you, Leila, as a young person with your whole professional life ahead still? Have you felt any change, or did you have any plan that now won't be possible to?
Yeah, no? Yes, definitely. I mean, I've seen change in many different ways. So my uncle, who lives in Belgium and has devoted his life's work to working for the EU Parliament, has now lost his job because he doesn't have Belgian citizenship, despite living there for years. I have friends who I study with who have decided to move back to Europe or can't afford to study here. I would love to audition to do a master's abroad, but I fear that I wouldn't be able to afford it now. And again, obviously, I would like to become a professional musician and tour Europe, but I fear again that just won't be possible because of the costs involved. And I really just think for creatives and musicians in the kind of industry that I want to go into, it's just narrowing so many options for us. And again, it's not a step forward. If anything, it's a huge step backwards.
I think there's been a lack of any word of remorse, anything from the Leave campaign, the Leave voters, or this government, anything that acknowledges what has been done to many, many millions of people in this country. Not one word of sorry, this has shattered your lives, or even this will have made changes to your life. How can a country, how can leadership, how can part of the population that seems to think that it has finger on patriotism cannot accept or acknowledge the harm, the damage, the sadness done to so many millions of its, not only its own native people, but to the Union of the United Kingdom and to our European neighbours. We're all of the same blood. We're all intermingled. We've all conquered each other's countries and whatever. Why on earth have we done this to ourselves? And we're trying to pretend that we're something that we're not. Ultimately, we will be European again. There is no other choice. And they might as well accept it now and join with us.
So you really think there's a possibility of rejoining the EU?
Oh, there will have to be. Whether it's we just go back into the customs union to start with or the single market, it makes no sense, especially with climate change. To think that we can avoid being part of that trading bloc and that social, economic, philosophical, shared value bloc is completely bananas.
Well, Leila, it will be the young generations who decide that. How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, you say that, but the way things are headed, it's just old white men in power and we can't do anything about it. But I would like to add, again, climate change, this is real and we need to sort it out. And now with Brexit, we are looking to form trade deals with India and with Australia, which, think of the carbon footprint that's going to increase. It's ridiculous. And also, building on Joe's point about no one has acknowledged the terrible things that Brexit has done for a lot of people, no one has also acknowledged that a lot of the Leave campaign was built on lies and mistrust and deception. And this is the way that our government is heading. This is just the start. And if people don't wake up and realise what is happening to our country, then I really do fear what it's going to be like down the line.
Really interesting ideas and reflections. Okay, and the final question now. What is your message for the audience, for British citizens, Europeans, people from all around the world, from different generations? What would you say? Joe, please.
I think we need to look at ourselves really carefully and give ourselves a second chance. I can't move the Titanic. I can't turn around the government on my own. I'm part of the most fabulous group of people who will become millions, who will turn this around. And I personally pledge to Leila and to the young people that I will use every ounce of energy that I have left in my 68-year-old body to make sure that you have a future in Europe where you can thrive, where you can enjoy, you can live, you can love, and feel how good it is to be part of something bigger than a little island and some small-minded people.
Leila?
My message would be that we are stronger together. I know I said that before, but I really, really believe we are stronger together. And right now we need to work together more than anything, especially with climate change, especially with just, you hear in the news recently about all this racism with Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement. We need to work together to combat this, to fight it and to make the world a better place. And I think leaving the EU is not the way to do that. And I want to say to all the fellow young people out there, we need to be aware of this, and we need to try and make change so that we can make the world a better, safer place.
This has been a really interesting and passionate interview. Thank you for both of you for participating in the project as guests. I'm sure your words and your thoughts will move and touch a lot of people, because it's really powerful what you say. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Ryan, thank you, Alexiane. Thank you also to your team for this great job. This film, and all the parts of your project are published also on the Europe Direct website, thanks to you. And now, before introducing our next guest speaker, I would like to give you some explanation about the Q&A session. So for the attendees, please raise your hand in the chat, and my colleague Sonia will give you the floor to ask your questions. And now I would like to introduce you our guest speaker, Christoph Hansen, member of the European Parliament, EP rapporteur for the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement. Christoph Hansen holds a master's degree in geosciences and environmental sciences and risk management from the Louis Pasteur University in Strasbourg. He began his career as political advisor to MEP Astrid Lulling, and then he pursued his activities as a member of the Luxembourg Permanent Representation to the EU, where he chaired the Council Working Party on the Environment during the Luxembourg EU Council Presidency in 2015, and the Luxembourg Chamber of Commerce between 2016 and 2018. Christoph Hansen has been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2018, first succeeding Viviane Reding, and having been re-elected in 2019. He is a member of the Committee on International Trade, where he is the leader rapporteur on Brexit. He also joined the subcommittee on tax matters, and he's part of EP delegation for relation with the countries of the Andean Community and the Euro-Latin Parliamentary Assembly. Since 2018, Christoph Hansen is a member of the National Committee of the Christian Social People's Party and president of the CSV Committee of the North District. Christoph Hansen, I invite you to take the floor in order to enlighten us about Brexit, current and future challenges. The floor is yours.
Yes, good evening. I hope you can hear me and you can see me. And I'm very delighted that you invited me to speak to you briefly, and as well, I'm looking forward very much on the Q&A session we will have later on the current challenges on the relations between the European Union and the United Kingdom, because the challenges are numerous. I think we had now the sad opportunity to learn about the individual, let's say, bad experiences that many UK citizens, but as well European citizens, are living for the moment. Because I believe, and I believe it truly, that Brexit is a historical mistake, and that is certainly going to be written many times in the future, because it is as well and the first time that we are deconstructing our relationships, that we are as a European Union not building up, not putting us more together, but getting further away. And this is definitely not the right direction. The European Union and the beginning of the European Union is first and foremost a union of peace. I think that is way too often forgotten, but I would like to remember this. And of course, raising barriers is bringing nothing but conflict. And I think the recent the news that we get as well, for example, on the Northern Ireland Protocol, are very, very worrisome, and I think you are all aware of this. Nonetheless, well, of course, I'm very glad that tonight so many people were speaking that are very much in favor of tightening our relations between the EU and the European Union, but nonetheless, the historic mistake has been committed. We have now to make the best out of a very ugly situation, I have to say. And since I have followed the negotiations over the past years, I have to say that I got more than one deception during this whole process. We had deadlines that have been postponed, commitments, or we didn't negotiate in good faith until the very last moment. As you know, it was really a last minute agreement that got struck in the end of 2020, and even though I sometimes ask myself, was everybody on the table even aware about the more than 1,000 pages that had been agreed upon? My serious opinion about that is that it is not the case. Otherwise, I can't understand the United Kingdom and their the politicians that are now contesting many of the agreed parts. And I think the Northern Ireland Protocol that is now applied for only a couple of months and that was jointly negotiated between the EU and the UK is definitely a sign of this, because we had as well in the negotiations proposed different options. You all remember the famous backstop that would have maybe been an easier solution to deal with the situation and the border as well between Northern Ireland and the island of Ireland. We are all aware that the Good Friday Agreement is now ensuring peace for 30 years, and that definitely this is a very important argument to not building new borders between Northern Ireland and the rest of the island. But as well, it is a weak point because it is a contact point to our internal market, and this is why I believe that the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Withdrawal Agreement are the best possible solutions that could be agreed upon. Nonetheless, you saw as well the pictures about empty supermarkets and a lot of, let's say, breaches in the agreement from the UK side, and namely when it comes to veterinary and phytosanitary controls that are should be done already in not on the border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the island, but in the Irish Sea actually, and the United Kingdom has been so far refusing it, and we have now to deal with the situation. And there I have to say we are always, as European Union, very constructive. Even if we have this agreement, we now proposed in the beginning of November a solution to go towards the United Kingdom there and say, okay, we can simplify, we can install fast lanes, we can reduce paperwork so that the trade flows are getting easier. 80% of the sanitary and phytosanitary checks would fall down. We could as well the paperwork reduce it by half. This is a huge concession because this was not foreseen in the agreement in the framework of the Northern Ireland Protocol. Nonetheless, this is at this stage still refused by the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom is even, and you heard about that, the threatening of triggering Article 16 of the protocol. But maybe I go a little bit back to explain to you. You are all academics, and so I think we can as well go a little bit more in the details. So the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland is, of course, an essential part of the EU-UK withdrawal agreement that acknowledges, as well as I said, the unique circumstances on the island of Ireland. And the aim of the protocol is twofold. So firstly, it is to avoid, as I said, a hard border on the island of Ireland and to preserve the Good Friday or the Belfast Agreement, how it is called as well. And secondly, to protect as well the integrity of the EU internal market, the EU single market, by making sure the border doesn't turn into a soft target for smuggling of goods into the EU that would not respect the EU standards. And the terms were negotiated in 2019 and concluded, as I said, in December 2020. And under the protocol, certain rules of the single market and customs union still apply in Northern Ireland, and consequently, Northern Ireland has a unique access as well to the single market. And this is also to ensure that there are no custom checks, as I said, or controls between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and instead of the land border, the protocol foresees customs checks on trade across the Irish Sea conducted by the United Kingdom. And so now, what is this article, this famous Article 16, that the United Kingdom is threatening to trigger? Article 16 of the protocol allows the parties to unilaterally take appropriate safeguard measures in cases where its application leads to serious economic, societal, or environmental difficulties, or the diversion of trade. But such safeguard measures must be limited in scope and duration to what is strictly necessary in order to remedy the situation. And it, just to give you one figure on trade, because leaving the EU single market had a serious impact on the EU single market, and as well the customs union, because it has reduced the export of goods from the United Kingdom to the rest of the world by approximately 10 billion euros, which is around 8.5 billion British pounds. So this stands for a reduction of 11.2%. Boris Johnson always defends himself. This is the effect of the pandemic. So certainly there might be a certain impact on that, but I think it is definitely not the only impact. So now, what is happening still in the United Kingdom? I think I'm still in contact with many stakeholders and citizens from the United Kingdom that, of course, ask us to help them because they feel left alone with their problems by their own government. And this is, of course, worrisome, and British industry has recently sounded as well the alarm that the UK faces a serious labour shortage, and that this is not going to be resolved in the next years. I think this is definitely something where the United Kingdom will even suffer more in the next ways. In the next years, sorry, and what I was talking about, the Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol, this will allow or give us the means, the legal tools, both sides, the EU or the UK, to suspend parts of this agreement. And this is, of course, would mean an escalation, and this escalation definitely will not help neither the economy of the United Kingdom nor the economy of the European Union, all proportionate. There's of course differences because the exports from the UK in percentages are way higher than the exports from the European Union to the United Kingdom, but still the impact on certain member states might eventually be huge. France, Belgium, Netherlands, the countries that are doing, because of geographic reasons, the most of the of their trade with member states of the European Union, and vice versa. So I think this is very important to say, and that's definitely why we need to find solutions, pragmatic solutions. We, as the European Parliament, of course, want to tighten our relations with as well politicians from the UK side, because I think the pressure is growing on their side as well. So we established now a month ago a delegation, an interparliamentary delegation of members from the European Parliament and members of the Parliament and politicians from the UK side, in order to keep up and to bring back on a real level a real dialogue, because I think we have to find definitely pragmatic solutions for our businesses, but as well for our citizens, for our students, because those are you are, and there are many students here now tonight. You are suffering the most of the liberties that you are definitely losing with this Brexit, and you named some of the programs where citizens of the United Kingdom are not taking place and not going to be able to participate anymore. So this is, of course, as well very worrisome, and I really feel deeply with you that have to face and assume the responsibilities that politicians took instead of you. Many people and Brexiteers always argue, well, there has been a clear result in this famous referendum. I would say that this referendum was misused for internal political reasons. Many people didn't exactly know, even though the question was formulated quite simple, let's say, the impact and the repercussions of such a decision nonetheless were not explained at all. And we are now living, and especially people that are living, traveling, having friends on both sides of the channel, they are really now facing the real problems and the direct impacts, and that is something I think where we have as well to bring to the attention more and more to the UK side. There is possibility, and the testimony of Jo, I think it was quite heartbreaking that she can't plan her life as she did. She has now the opportunity to get a passport because she has Italian origins, but her life plans are completely destroyed right now. And this is, of course, this individual disasters that make Brexit even harder, because you can say on some percentages of trade, nobody will have to change massively its life, but here it's really the destiny and the future of young and old people. It's not only young people, it's as well older people, as you could see from the example, are really suffering hugely. And I find it quite hypocrite when you hear that people like Nigel Farage, one of the main Brexiteers, who used to be a colleague of mine in the European Parliament, even though he was not very often there, unless he was as well shouting in the back of the room, but for the rest, work in the Parliament he didn't do. Just to let you know that he asked for his 2 children a German passport, because he exactly knew the consequences of what this would bring for British citizens. And I think this is, of course, one of a very tragic example of a politician that misled people, that used as well the media, or the very special media in the United Kingdom, that the tabloids, of course, they were very happy to get these huge scandals, even though it was just lies circulating around. So for me, of course, I am happy that this personage, Farage, is not a member of the European Parliament anymore, but nonetheless, the European Union has hugely lost and has lost of its weight as well on the international scene, because the United Kingdom, of course, was a very strong member state in the European Union back in time. It was sitting at the negotiating table, and that is as well. Also, I never understood this this paradigm, or let's say what Johnson and his people were bringing forward. We are going to take back control. Well, they were sitting at the table of negotiations. They were one of the most powerful member states in the European Union, but now they have lost all of this control. And I think the global Britain that they wanted to promote will not even be a Great Britain anymore. It will be a very local Britain in the end, because as you know as well, the world economy is changing drastically, and even altogether, 27 remaining member states of the European Union are in the global economics a very small player meanwhile, and our impact will as well decrease over time. So Great Britain is even smaller than the European Union, so I am not sure if they will be able to have concrete agreements and get something good out of deals with the United States, with China, and with other big powers like India, like it has been mentioned by one of the speakers before. So we are all losing out of the situation. Of course, I share the wish that Jo expressed in her testimony earlier on, that we should come back and get the United Kingdom back to the European Union. Nonetheless, I think this will be a very, very long process if we get there, and we have to do now, and we have really to work on short-term agreements, for example, on the mobility of students, etc., to get these mini side deals done that allow as well for UK citizens to participate in these freedoms that we benefit of in the European Union. All this has nothing to do, of course, with the economic ties, and I was in charge mainly of the trade part of the agreement. So this just to close, and I'm looking forward to your questions and to a good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christoph Hansen, for your explanation. Now, the first written question in the chat. A new political majority in Britain wants to come back. What should the elementary condition be?
So the question is directed to me, of course. Well, this is, I would say, the problem was this, let's say, this yes and no campaign, or this Brexit and Remain campaign, which is, of course, always difficult if we have two extremes. Where do we find the middle ground? And what Johnson and that is really the problem I see. He managed to divide many political groups as well, and political parties. And for the moment, I don't see the one that is emerging from the ashes there. And this is, of course, had already been planned. I think you have as well seen that Boris Johnson convinced Nigel Farage and his UKIP party not to stand to bring up a candidate in a constituency where there was a Tory member or likely to get the seat. And this agreement destroyed completely, in my opinion, the political landscape. So I think we have now to see, and we have to get to the front row for those who are arguing for closer ties with the European Union. This has to be not a top-down but a bottom-up process, in my opinion. Because this is, of course, worrisome if it's only some elites deciding about citizens, and the citizens are not really in that game. So that it is, of course, a dynamic that we can't really influence from the European Union side. I think what we can do is to get the narrative back on a positive lane, but of course it needs two to tango. We have had many disputes now over the trade and cooperation agreement when it comes to, for example, to fisheries. I see that there are certain detentions now because the United Kingdom is now finally releasing some licenses that have been retained, being given to French fishermen, for example. There is also more dialogue now when it comes to illegal migration between the continent and the United Kingdom. And of course, you have had seen the drama of people drowning in the Channel, and I think this has been somehow a wake-up call, or at least I hope so. And these elements, and where we have a common interest, I think should come back to the forefront of the discussion. Unfortunately, I have a little bit the feeling that for Boris Johnson and his party, they are currently living and making their campaigns out of the conflict and the confrontations with the European Union. And as long as you are looking for this confrontation, while he is always standing there as the strong man defending the interest of the sovereign United Kingdom. By the way, he was always using this term, but as well the European Union is sovereign. I have to repeat that. And therefore, I think this needs to be really a bottom-up initiative in the United Kingdom. People that realize that they have been lied to and that they don't agree with anymore with people, or don't follow people anymore that are just lying to them and leading them to big dramas and personal dramas. And that's as much as we can do. We can engage positively. We can try to de-escalate the situations, but of course, then at some point the counterpart, and this is the UK, needs to come back to reason as well. We have, of course, elections coming up sooner or later, and then that will then be as well the moment of the bottom up, the citizens' initiatives to push for more a citizens' approach. What is in the interest of the citizens and not just of the politicians.
Christoph Hansen. Another question. The first one was from Alvin Solt. The second one comes from Jonathan Little. Yes. Wait.
Sorry. I do apologize. I do apologize. I have some technical problems with my computer. So the second question is a written question from Professor Desmond Thomas, who is teacher at the University of Luxembourg. In 2016, the UK Electoral Commission reported that the size of the registered electorate on the referendum day was 46.5 million, and 72.1% of that turned out to vote in answer to the question, should the United Kingdom remain a member of the European Union or leave the EU? 17.5 million voted to leave, 16.1 million voted to remain, 12.9 million did not vote. It is therefore not correct to state that the British referendum on 23 June, the majority of the electorate voted for the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the EU or Brexit. In reality, 51.89% of the 72.1% voted to leave. I am interested in the 12.9 million who did not vote, plus extra 400,000 new voters who have joined the electoral register from 2016 to 2021. Who are those people? How can the EU reach out to them and convince them of the mutual benefits of trans-European cooperation? Thank you.
Well, of course, the figures are also very tangible sometimes, and sometimes they're very elastic as well. So interpretation, there is of course a lot of room for interpretation. I would say, well, the election outturn in the end was quite high. It was over 70%, so over 2/3 of the voters went to the voting to vote. But still there is almost 1/3 that didn't go to vote. This is, of course, the people that were undecided probably, but as well for those who voted in favor for Brexit. When you talked to many of them, they just say, well, we wanted to make a political statement and we never thought it would go through. Many of them said so, and a lot of others were just following as well the blunt tabloid-like slogans that Johnson, Farage, and those people were shouting around. So this is, of course, very worrisome, but things that is, of course, nothing where the European Union would have a direct influence on. So this is, of course, very difficult to interpret. I have my personal interpretation. If all UK citizens would have gone to vote, and if there would have not been this, let's say, this political behavior, which had nothing to do with I'm in favor or against. Well, so a lot of people voted just because they wanted to give a signal to the one or the other party, and I think that this is underestimated in that as well. Personally, I think a referendum is always a sign of weakness of politicians, because politicians should have sufficiently contact with their citizens to feel what they really want, and this was just a legitimization. When you go back in history as well, when David Cameron wanted to go into the direction of this referendum, I think Cameron was, of course, under pressure, but he was still somebody who in principle thought, well, we are going now to have this referendum, and then people will decide to remain, and then the discussion is over. But well, there he miscalculated himself this situation, and he gambled in some kind of way the future as well of UK citizens, even though that he didn't agree on the principle, I believe. But this is speculation from my side, so it's difficult to say. I personally say that it was not a binding referendum. So in principle, I would have expected as well more, let's say, outcry of citizens back in time, which many people were shocked, and many people were still saying, well, this is the result, but this is never going to happen. And it took quite a long time until it happened by the end of 2020. But still, there we are, and this is something, an irreversible situation. The only thing we can, at some point, once this divorce is more or less over, and even now, I think we should try to make the best and cooperate on those parts where it is not conflictual. I can understand that on certain issues, when it comes to access to waters for fishing grounds, etc., that there might be disputes. Okay, I understand that completely. But when it comes to the freedom of our citizens, that is something where I don't understand it anymore. And this is definitely something that has to be resolved on the UK side. That is something where we, of course, our hand remains extended, but of course there is somebody who needs to take it on the other side, and as well on the political scene. And this is as well something I think every British voter should be aware about when he goes next time to elections, that he or she should vote somebody that is really going and arguing for the interests of every single citizen.
Thank you. Another question. To what extent do the European Parliament appreciate the importance of restricting concessions on the Northern Ireland Protocol only to the practical issues on the ground? If the Commission expands the scope of its October package to compromise on the role of European Court of Justice or state aid reachback in the absence of any concomitant sacrifice of sovereignty by the UK in return, for example, by signing up to a Swiss-style veterinary agreement, then will the EU not risk being seen to bow the threats or breaching international law?
Well, first of all, I think what we have to clarify is that the withdrawal agreement is an international agreement that is legally binding, that I think we have to underline. And if one of the parties does not come up and cope with its obligation under this agreement, there will be consequences. And as well, in the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, that is one of the reasons why the European Parliament as well ratified the agreement, because, as you know, it has been the agreement has been struck in the end of 2020 and has then been provisionally applied until the official ratification by the European Parliament took place 3-4 months later. But exactly this gives us as well the legal means to enforce the let's say the contract that has been agreed upon. And of course, if there are things that are not working in practice, then the European Union will always be the one that will be there to negotiate practical solutions. And I think this has been done on the as a reaction to the threat and the let's say the David Frost's accusation that the protocol wasn't working. The protocol is working, but the United Kingdom is not entirely coping with its obligation under the Northern Ireland Protocol. So in principle, the European Union would already be in the place of for several months already, because there have been extensions of grace periods or not respecting of grace periods when it comes to veterinary and phytosanitary controls, where the United Kingdom was clearly in breach of the agreement. The European Union did not trigger Article 16, which we could have done. And I think this is a huge sign as well of the goodwill that the European Union shows. And the offer that Maros Sefcovic has put on the table, where still the United Kingdom is not moving ahead, reduces significantly exactly about what the United Kingdom complained, even though they signed up for it. But and that's what I said in the beginning. Probably it was not they were not able to read everything and assess everything in detail in the last days of the negotiations. But nonetheless, this is an agreement. This is legally binding, and that's what both parties need to assume now. They have put their signatures. This comes, and putting a signature brings as well a certain responsibility. The European Union will be there to be as flexible as possible, be as accommodating as possible, but nonetheless there are limits, and there needs as well for a concession from one side, a reaction and a positive one from the other side.
Is there a way we can lift customs charges on gifts to family and friends in the EU from UK?
That's a very good question. Personally, I think under the current situation, or at least for this Christmas, it will not be possible anymore, because, well, you of course know that things have got more difficult over the last months. For gifts, well, of course, there as well you could talk about eventual thresholds, but this again would need to have a new agreement. Currently, under this agreement, it is not possible, unfortunately. And well, I'm a huge cyclist and cyclist fan, of course, and I have many friends doing cycling, and many of them were as well ordering the car. Bikes and wheels, etc., from the United Kingdom. Well, they are not doing it anymore because it's getting just too complicated for single elements like that if you are not a professional in the sector. And this is, of course, not helping our liberty or our freedom of choice of goods. That is exactly the aim of an internal market, to bring barriers down, to assure, and one of the 4 freedoms we have is the freedom of that goods can circulate freely. Well, this has not been wanted anymore by the political responsibles of Brexit in the United Kingdom. To establish that, well, there is a long process, I unfortunately have to say.
Thank you. A new question. Would EU expect our electoral system to have changed profoundly? First past the post would not be stable enough, certainly?
Could you please repeat the question? I didn't get it entirely.
Would EU expect our electoral system to have changed profoundly?
Okay, so our means the UK electoral system. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is of course not in our hands. And in principle, this is exactly the constitution of every single country that is at stake when it comes to electoral modes and procedures and rules. This is something we are not getting. We are not, let's say, getting our fingers to that pot, because this is not our responsibility. If there is a constitutional change desire in the United Kingdom, there are as well means, as there are in all the member states, that can trigger such a change, but this is of course not in the hands of the European Union.
Question. The argument about policing the border between France and the UK has drawn attention to the Treaty de Touquet.
Do you think the French population will continue to tolerate the current arrangement if the UK criticizes it so strongly?
Well, you always have to look at who is criticizing. I think when it comes to the common citizens, probably there is less interest because of because as well of a lack of knowledge on this concrete matter. So I think that we shouldn't politicize such agreements too much, because it is not helpful and it is not understandable by les communs des mortels, like you would say in French.
Thank you. Another question for you. Tragically, the House of Commons today voted to allow boats in the Channel to be physically turned around, inevitably causing death, I would say. Can the EU do anything to stop this madness?
Well, of course, that is what I said earlier on. I think there is room and I think what has to be very clear when boats are turned around, when there are lives of migrants at stake, it's not to play political games anymore. I think that has to be made very, very clear. So that is, for me, in my opinion, another populist and hugely irresponsible behavior that I, at least, cannot tolerate. Of course, all the member states and as well non-member states try and protect their external borders, but I think there is a need and a necessity, and this is with all the cross-border challenges, a necessity when it is. Here we are talking about migration. We have as well cross-border challenges when it comes, for example, to air pollution, when it comes to water pollution, when it comes to climate change. This is nothing that is will stop at the borders. So I think there all a responsible politician has to be reasonable and to and cannot risk lives of people, and that is what such decisions would bring.
The Brexit referendum was an advisory referendum. That's why a lot of people didn't vote. She would like to ask you, Christoph Hansen, to comment on the advisory nature of the referendum.
Well, as I said again, or as I said earlier on, in general, for me, a referendum is, well, especially on such decisions, it's usually, I don't think it's a good idea, but because I can't think of a referendum that has brought something good. Maybe I'm still too young to have lived such a referendum, but mostly a referendum that I have lived in Luxembourg in the recent years as well, has always contributed to split the citizens, to split to make huge rifts between people and society, and that is definitely not helpful. That's why we have constitutional provisions when the referendum is necessary. For example, if 25,000 citizens in Luxembourg would register at their municipality to ask for a referendum, then there is, of course, a need for it. But on the other hand, on political decisions, we have a representative democracy. You have to account in front of your citizens, your voters, and then I think if you are doing the wrong choices, then you are not getting re-elected, and this is how things should work. You should not put the responsibility on the citizens and then say, well, you have said so, and now you have to assume we have to assume the responsibility. This is the wrong way around. In my opinion, the advisory referendum is, of course, it was not legally binding, but still a majority of voters that turned out was for the Brexit, and that is what they then used, even though it was not legally binding, to go ahead with their proceedings on making Brexit happen. And of course, I deeply regret this. And it was a wrong idea as well by David Cameron back in time. Unfortunately, we cannot turn the clock around. Back then, maybe people would have needed to be more pushy to not go ahead with the Brexit plans. That has been not sufficiently the case, unfortunately, for one reason or another, because maybe they thought it would never happen. That's what many people, even I wasn't in active European politics back in time in 2016, but I also thought, well, this is never going to work. But still, now we are there, and we have to make the best out of an ugly situation.
In Europe, Brexit is not at the top of the media agenda. What about the UK media? How important was the role of media on the result of the referendum?
I can clearly a testimony in that sense, because I was, as a rapporteur in the European Parliament, so I was not directly involved in the negotiations, but of course we got Michel Barnier met us on a weekly basis to update us, because we, of course, as European Parliament, had to give consent to the agreement. I have to say, I was maybe contacted 3 or 4 times by Luxembourgish press as the lead rapporteur in the European Parliament on this very important file, that even for Luxembourg is a very important one, because we have our financial place in Luxembourg that is very closely working with the City of London. We have many UK citizens living in Luxembourg. We have many Luxembourgish citizens and students living in the UK and studying in the UK. So we have a lot of interest, but the press in Luxembourg was rather not interested in this in Brexit. Nonetheless, I couldn't get hold of all the British media that was asking I could have done 20 interviews per day on Brexit back in time, but this, of course, I as well got to know better the British media, and of course I as well saw sometimes what I say and what they made, or some media, at least the tabloids, what they made out of the statements. They are very strong about, let's say, taking some pieces of your statement and just putting it into a different light, and then it can sound very differently. And so that is something I had to learn as well during the process. So I think the British media, and especially let's say the tabloid media, I don't want to find any more negative word for this media, but they of course influenced hugely a huge part of citizens that is not necessarily working directly on topics related to the European Union, or being directly let's say, working for a company that is doing trade or etc. with the European Union. So this was then an easy game, let's say, for the Brexiteers via these tabloids to get a huge movement for Brexit up and running. I think the media played a huge role, but I think it is a problem that is spreading around, and it is not only in the United Kingdom anymore, because when you are talking to people, and I'm meeting a little bit less now because of the sanitary restrictions, but when you are meeting people in the city center, etc., on other activities, a lot of people are not consulting on a daily basis, let's say, serious media anymore. They are reading Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter at the best, and then sometimes some headlines of the newspapers or internet sites. But real deep information on substance is getting less and less to our citizens, because citizens are simply scrolling down on their iPhones. They see a title, and when the title is let's say more sexier and more punchy, of course they are just retaining the title. So they get in principle, more information on different topics, but on substance, less information, because it's just not possible to process all this information and as well to make distinction between what is serious, what is not serious, and what is simply turned around to become a lie, and that is a real problem, not just in the UK, but I have to say during the whole process, it was some media that is very widely spread, that is the media where you don't have to pay for, is of course the one that gets to most of the citizens, and that has played a major role of this outcome for the Brexiteer camp.
Thank you very much. And now the last question of this session. Recent reports suggest that the UK is unprepared for changes that will come into effect next year. Do you agree? And if so, what will be they?
Well, I would not only project it to changes of next year. I think when we already know, and the withdrawal agreement had been and the deadlines had been known for years, and still we saw at the very last moment that, for example, when it came to custom controls, the recruitment of customs officers, the UK was simply not prepared and did not sufficiently recruit and prepare to all the paperwork, and that is definitely one of the reasons why we had in the beginning or on the first days of Brexit huge queues at the borders, because a lot of the lorry drivers did not have the appropriate papers. The customs officers were not all already fully trained, or there were just simply not enough of them to deal with the additional paperwork. This needed to get into motion. Meanwhile, it is working quite well, even though it is, of course, an additional burden, and this additional burden costs as well money. That is no secret. And as I said as well earlier on trade figures, we have seen that the exports from the UK side have gone down by 10%, over 10% in value. This is a huge impact. There are other changes coming up. I would need to know what exactly the person that asked this question was meaning by which disruption would be coming up next year. Then I could reply more in detail. But just to give you an example of how the UK was not prepared for what they have signed up to. This is as well because I think one part of the explanation is that it was a very last-minute agreement. It was in the end of December, and on the 1st of January, it had to be provisionally applied. So this is, of course, why not everything, and there was still the risk of the so-called cliff edge scenario, which fortunately has been avoided, but nonetheless there are disruptions, and there will be disruptions coming up. But I would be curious to hear from the speaker which exact disruption coming up in the next years he was referring to.
Christoph Hansen, for your analysis about this relationship between EU and UK and about the present challenges and issues. The debate was very lively, and it gathered a huge public from UK, from the greater region, mainly students, and also students from Sciences Po Paris. So thank you very much once again. And now, for giving us the concluding remarks and her analysis about this topic and this debate, I would like to invite to take the floor Madame Martin Hansen. Let me
Hello, not yet. That's Martin Hansen.
I combined the name of the deputy.
That's my cousin. So.
Martin Reichert. So I do apologize, Madame Reichert. So apologize again. So Madame Martin Reichert,
Madame Martine Reichertz has held multiple positions during her career. She was deputy head of cabinet in the cabinet of President Jacques Santer, as well as his spokesperson. He was also Director General of the Publication Office of the European Union, European Commissioner in charge of the Justice portfolio for 4 months, Director General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture, and since February 2018, she has been a member of the board of the Central Bank in Luxembourg, and since December 2019, she is the president of the National Research Fund in Luxembourg. Madame Reichertz is also president of the Luxembourg Federation of Yoga Teachers, member of the Strategic Council, University of Aix-Marseille, a member of the board of the Alumni Européen, a member of the board of the Solis Européen Luxembourg, and president of the Movement Européen Luxembourg. Madame Reichertz, with my apologies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elena. No, this was an honor. And that's why I said Christoph, not yet. Great. Thanks a lot, first of all, to the organization of this debate by Europe Connect, with the help of all the people you mentioned, Elena. I think this was a great moment. It's important to talk to each other. My concluding remarks would be the following. I will start by quoting Winston Churchill. And you all know this quote: democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the others that have been tried. And I think what happened in the UK with the referendum, this is part of democracy, has ended up in what we see now. But at the end of the day, we are in a system that is a democratic system, and I think the UK is very proud of its democratic system. And we, as non-people from the UK, have to respect this. So I think the result was clear, and whatever we can talk about, I've heard so many analyses saying, the day on the elections, all students were on holidays, so that's one of the reasons why they didn't go for elections. There are so many explanations like this, but at the end of the day, we have a result, and we have to respect that result. So now, and that's the consequence, our young people especially, because I knew the times ages ago where we had all this, but young people today have discovered that all over Europe, tax barriers exist again. Free circulation of people is something you have to fight for. It's not an evidence anymore. It's just something that was the case, and now you need to show your passport. I know that this is a shock for lots of young people. Borders exist again, but on the other hand, once in a while you need a shock to be able to react. But since I'm an optimist, and I've always been, and I repeat, no situation is ever lost. So when I look at our young federalists in the UK, I think it's a really great feeling to see that they're moving. We'll see where they end, but I think it's important that young people and less young people start just moving on. And I think the portrait they showed to us tonight is one step in that direction. And again, it's in the hands of the people in the UK. And frankly, I don't feel like interfering. I think it's really up to them now to take their own destiny in their own hands. But I will share with you a few ideas. Elena has given a very impressive portrait of my own CV. But the thing I'm most proud of are the years where I was the mother of the Erasmus program. And I can here testify, after the results of this referendum in the UK, all the deans, all the association of students passed by my office because everybody had understood very quickly that this would be a catastrophe for the students. The Erasmus program is definitely the most popular in the European Union. And I would say that when students go abroad to study somewhere else, that's where we build the living together. And the living together is not something theoretical. It's what you do when you sit in the bar in the evening and you're having a beer or coffee together. And that's where we build bridges, and it's definitely not in theory books. And sorry, professor of history, it's also not a question of history. It's a question of ladies, girls, men, women, and it's about social context. And that's something you learn from kid on in the kindergarten. And the more we move the people in Europe, the better it will be. And this is something we will need to address. The Erasmus program, for the time being, the UK is out. But, and that was said tonight too, some of the countries not in the European Union are part of the Erasmus program. So the UK may join if they buy their entry tickets, because that's the condition. But that's a political choice again, but this is feasible, and I know that there are some movements into that direction. The same is true for science and research. Marie Curie Skłodowska, which is the program, the exchange program for students, for PhD students, can also be addressed by the same issue. The UK may buy an entry ticket. Of course, they need to pay the entrance fee. I think there's nothing for free in this place, but I think this is feasible. And when we know all how brilliant scientists in the UK are, I think it could be a win-win situation to allow those agreements to be negotiated. It will probably take a little bit of time. We've seen this also with Switzerland, because they are not in either for different reasons, but I'm pretty sure when there is a will, there is a can. So I think this is probably possible. Christoph earlier on was talking about the role of media. I will make the link with education. I've been pleading for a few years, when I was in charge of education at the European level, that it's fundamental to start in schools by teaching the critical thinking. It's only when you start in the schools and you teach our kids from kindergarten on real critical thinking that we will achieve real democracy. Because it's not about qualifying the press or not, but if you are not able to just analyze what you're reading or hearing, being it social media or the traditional press, I think for me this is a fundamental question. Education is the alpha and the omega in this, and we need critical thinking to allow also a quality press. And quality press is not something that gives the truth, it's something that allows a discussion and a dialogue. One of the other mistakes, and I will say here, being, as you have understood, a real European, and I've been spending my whole career in the European Commission, I think one of the mistakes in this referendum, because everybody had completely underestimated the possible results, especially at the political level, is that Europe took the decision not to intervene in the debate. And so at the European level, we allowed all the possible criticisms about Europe in the UK and elsewhere. And we had a kind of neutral position, which means that we didn't favor, we didn't defavor, because nobody really dares to explain what this would be about. So this was probably a political mistake, and it allowed also what we call in Brussels the European bashing. You know, Europe is always guilty about everything. But this is not only a problem in the UK. I think this is a fundamental problem in the European Union. When you look at the structure of decisions at the European level, when ministers are sitting in Brussels and they take decisions, and it's the kind of decisions they like for their own countries, then they go back to their countries and they say, okay, I've been fighting for that decision, so I'm in charge. If something is being decided they don't like, then it's, you know, it's the European bastards, I overdo it a little bit, but it's the Eurocrats in Brussels that decided upon something. I think we need a little bit of order in the debates about Europe. Europe is far from perfect, and I really can testify on so many occasions. And I think the way decisions are being taken in Brussels is that it's the national ministers that take the decisions. It's not the people working in the European Commission, nor in the European Parliament. Sorry, Christoph, but the reality of life is that it's the ministers that take the decision, or the prime ministers, and you name them, in the European councils. So I think this has to be repeated. This is also a question of education, and people have to understand. I come to my final words because it's getting late. I'm really fascinated about what I saw in those videos. I think congratulations on this, because it's really something which is a great piece of work. So I really would like to invite our young people, because at the end of the day, they are preparing their future. I think they really should go for it. And I will just recall two of my favorite sayings. One is, happiness you build. It's not something you find. And so in producing those pieces, you contribute to what you called early on a better world. So congratulations for the videos, because in preparing those videos and really trying to move people, old, young, etc., you have proven, young federalists and all pro-Europeans, that you can be the change you want to see in the world, and you did it. So from the bottom of my heart, congratulations for this brilliant work, and I wish you all the best, especially to the people in the UK, and together we'll manage. I don't know what, but we'll see, and trust the people. They are much better than we think sometimes. All the best. Thank you so much for this very interesting debate. Looking forward to seeing you very soon. Elena, again, thank you, Professor. Thank you, Vice Rector. Thank you. And I think you will conclude, Elena.
A brief word. Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you all the organizers, the partners, the outstanding speakers, and we look forward to meet you in person at our next event in January. The event of this evening will be published on the Europe Direct University of Luxembourg webpage, and I wish you all the best for the next year. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.